One of the greatest visionaries of our nation, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, on Education and Caste by Professor Umesh Bagade. We are truly honored by your presence here, sir. I'm thrilled to have you for this momentous occasion. Dr. Ambedkar, fondly remembered as the architect of the Indian Constitution, was not only a jurist, economist, and politician, but also a staunch advocate for social justice and equality. His views on education and caste continues to inspire and guide us in our quest for a more equitable society. From Dr. Ambedkar's perspective, education was not merely about acquiring knowledge, but a potent tool for empowerment, emancipation, and social transformation. He believed that education has the power to break the shackles of caste based discrimination and enable individuals to rise above social barriers. Dr. Ambedkar's profound insight on caste, often challenging the status quo, advocated annihilating caste-based prejudices and establishing a society based, based on equality, fraternity, and dignity. He envisioned a society where one's worth is not determined by birth, but by one's capabilities and actions. Today, will dwell into Dr. Ambedkar's view on education and caste through our distinguished speaker, Professor Umesh Bagade. We embark on a journey of reflection, introspection, and enlightenment. Our understanding of these crucial aspects of our society will undoubtedly be enriched, and we hope to carry forward Dr. Ambedkar's legacy in our pursuit of a more just and inclusive society. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Umesh Bagade for gracing us with their expertise and insight. Your presence here today is a testament of your commitment to furthering Dr. Ambedkar's vision of social justice. I welcome our guest speaker, Professor Umesh Bagade, uh, uh, for gracing us. Uh, I invite him on stage, Sir Professor Umesh Bagade, sir. And yeah. He's department. He retired from Department of History, Dr. Ambedkar, Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar Marathwada University, Aurangabad, Maharashtra. To felicitate the guest, I invite our dear ma'am, Mrs. Sanjeevni Majumdar. I would now like to welcome our chief of the program, Professor Surendra Jondali, Department of Civics and Politics, and Professor and Coordinator, Dr. Ambedkar Center for Social Justice, University of Mumbai. To felicitate the guest, I now invite Professor J.B. Chandramani. I would like to welcome Dr. Prakash Sirasat. To felicitate the guest, I invite Dr. Ajay Chaudhary. I will invite our beloved man, Dr. Sanjeevni Majumdar, Director of Dr. Ambedkar Chair, Dr. Ambedkar Museum of Bagade. To welcome her, I invite Professor Jyoti Chandramani. We are all happy about you, so don't worry. I invite our mentor, Professor Jyoti Chandramani, Director, Symbiosis School of Economics and the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Symbiosis International Deemed University. She has consistently supported us in willing to assist even during the unconventional hour. To welcome her, I invite Professor Ajay Chaudhary. Please welcome. Thank you. I invite Professor Ajay Chaudhary, Chair, Professor Dr. Ambedkar Chair, Symbiosis International Deemed University. To welcome him, I invite Dr. Hemangi Kadlak. She is Assistant Professor at the Chair. Get out of the So, we are privileged to have you among us today, and we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to extend your support. Your esteemed presence has glorified the event and added vibrancy to our humble gathering. To all the attendees, I encourage you all to take active participation in the discourse, ask questions, share your views, and let us use this opportunity to learn, unlearn, relearn as we strive to create a society honoring the principles of Dr. Ambedkar, which he upheld. Once again, I extend a warm welcome, and I now invite Mrs. Sanjeevni Majumdar to address the gathering.
Respected Professor Bagade, Professor Zandaru, Dr. Chandi Ramani, Dr. Ajay Chaudhary, and my dear students. Today we have assembled here to listen the thoughts of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar on education and caste. He who initiated the movement of social justice and equality in India. He was the first law minister of India and posthumously awarded Bharat Ratna Award in 1990. This great son, who changed the lives of thousands of Indians because of his power of pen, because he wrote the Constitution of India and gave each individual, whether man or woman, equal rights. Here we are sitting in the premises of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Museum and Memorial, where all his personal belongings are preserved, which include the bed on which he breathed his last, the table and the chair on which he used to sit while writing the Constitution of India, the statue of Gautam Buddha, before which he used to bow down every day, a coveted Bharat Ratna Award, and his books, which he loved very much. He was a person who built a house, namely Rajagraha, for his 30,000 books, because he knew the power of education. When we thought of constructing this museum, we thought of constructing this library building also, because Babasaheb Ambedkar Museum without library is like body without soul. Dr. Ambedkar's emphasis on education as a tool for social transformation is evident in the establishment of People's Education Society in 1945, with branches all over Pune, Mumbai, Aurangabad, etc. His belief in the power of education to bring about social progress was unwavering. Education in Dr. Babasaheb's eyes was not just a means to secure government jobs. It was a path to social and political awareness, essential for protecting the rights not only of the least but all sections of the society. He firmly asserted that the progress of any society depends on the education which emphasizes the development of both mind and character. Ambedkar's conviction that education coupled with morality holds the key to social advancement is a timeless truth. He believed that education, when coupled with moral values, having the base of rationality and pragmatic thinking, which he adopted from John Dewey, that helps to transform fearless society. Annihilation Cost is an undelivered speech written in 1936 by Dr. Ambedkar, which was not delivered, and anti-caste convention held in Lahore by Hindu reformers, which refers to the complete eradication of caste system in India. He criticized the caste system as social evil that perpetuated inequality, discrimination, and social divisions. We wanted to create a society where individuals would be treated with dignity, respect, and regardless of the caste. His legacy challenges us to continue the struggle for justice and equality, to carry forward the torch of education as a powerful instrument of social change. As we think of Dr. Ambedkar's thoughts on education and caste, let us reflect on our roles as an educator and students in fostering a society where education becomes a force for liberation and where caste-based discrimination finds no place. Together, let us try to make Dr. Ambedkar's vision into reality in our classrooms, institutions, and in the society. Jai Hind, Jai Bhim.
I now invite Professor Jyoti Chandramani to address the gathering.
Thank you, Veer Pratap, for comparing the session. Lovely. A namaskar to all of you. Good morning. I welcome Dr. Sanjeevni Muzumdar, our chief guest for today, Professor Umesh Bagade, the chair of the program, Surendra Jondale, Ajay Chaudhary, and all my dear friends who are sitting in the audience here. A wonderful day to address a lecture on Dr. Ambedkar's views on education and caste. Since I'm not an expert on caste, I'll not speak on caste, but I'll speak on education for sure. It's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to work with Ajay Chaudhary ji on this particular platform, because I think as social scientists, we all have the same philosophy. We have the same thoughts. And I don't even talk about equality, but I talk about equity. And when we talk about equity, the words of the founder of this university, the founder of Symbiosis, Dr. Muzumdar sir, comes to my mind, because he says only education can be the oxygen for development. Only education can be the oxygen for development. An education system which is inclusive of caste, religion, gender, providing an equal opportunity to all. As we stand here today, 75 years post-independence, where have we reached and what are we doing? What have we achieved? Yes, the Constitution, 86th Amendment Act 202, inserted Article 21A in the Constitution of India to provide free and compulsory education of all the children in the age group of 6 to 14. Very, very important. This was later converted into an act in 2009, the right of children to free and compulsory education. Only when this is complied with will we have the gross enrollment ratio at the higher education level, which would be from its present 27, 28, 29, that it would be to at least 50 where we want to reach. It cannot happen without that. As we move down, in 2015, the world order announced the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see almost the same philosophy, the same thoughts of Dr. Ambedkar ji getting reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals. Please come in quickly. Come. Come and settle down so I can continue. So you have the Sustainable Development Goals, which ensures or which strives to ensure by 2030, 15 years from 2015 to 2030, inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities. The ASHI report, which is just out now in 2024 January, talks about how the number of institutions have gone up. The institutions have gone up, the universities have increased, the enrollments have gone. There is a kind of a gender parity that has been achieved. But from quantity, we have to move towards quality of education. Education is in its own way a dual system, a system between the private and the public, a system which gives access to some to a different quality of education and limited access to some who do not get that same quality of education. So the equity that we are looking for gets missed out. So while the graph is moving in the positive direction, it takes a long time to move from quantity to quality. And that will need a lot of innovation, lot of hard work, lot of inputs. And as I talk to you at this point, India has almost 33% of the youth who are in the category of NEET, not in education, not in employment, not in training. What are we rich in? We are rich in our human capital. But is our human capital really rich? Is it really free? So as Dr. Sanjeevni ma'am was talking about that it has to have moral values, I think education needs to have wisdom with it. Just having sheer education is not enough. It has to have wisdom in it. It has to empower self-reliance. It has to have, you have to have education which has access to quality, quality that is available to all. The role of the state is crucial in this regard. And you and me as great social change makers, we all have a role to play. And on this ground, I welcome you all to listen to the experts who would give their thoughts on the theme for today. Thank you so much.
I now invite Dr. Ajay Chaudhary to address the gathering.
Respected dignitaries, Professor Umesh Bagade, Jondre sir, Sanjeevni madam, and Jyoti madam, and my dear friends. Today we are going to have a discussion, or we are get a reflection on the education and the caste. As already said the previous speaker regarding the education, it has widely explained also what is the importance of education. But at the same time, we have to understand the education and its relation with the other institution. Being a student of the sociology, I really feel that the caste is one of the very prominent, system that has influenced the many aspects of the Indian society. We never want to talk on that, actually. We wanted to keep ourselves silent, or we want to avoid it. But when it comes to the Dr. Ambedkar's views, on the education and the caste, it gives us a lot of, pictures, the reflections that how the education and caste are interlinked with each other. So discussing the ideas of the Ambedkar, we oftenly find the caste system often collide our mind that could be registered in the form of the contention or denial, either to nullify or to maintain the caste prejudice. The Ambedkar's experiential reality instigate to investigate the operational phenomena of the caste in Indian institution. Although his writings and the speeches mostly revolve around the two independent, variables, that is the education and the caste, to examine the micro elements like democracy, politics, marriage, history, culture, religion, psychology, economics, literature, etc. But to formulate enlighten India, the intersection of the education and caste become the foundational perspective to emancipate the subaltern masses from the caste of the mind. It shows that the Ambedkar perceived the education not only as an imperative tool to develop ability and character, as Sanjeevani Madam said, but also to rationalize the mind with a scientific temperament. His objective of education to improve moral reasons, humanistic values, and education for the subaltern masses become a vibrant force to achieve rational society. However, for him, the education must be anti-caste in nature. It should not be like that we acquiring the degrees. It should not be like that just we are wanted degrees for the employment. But the education should resolve the issues which are existent in the society. That is the most approach of the any sort of the education. For Ambedkar, the education must be which enlighten the person to question the things. If they are questioning, they are rationalizing their mind. So in that regard, he says that the education must be anti-caste in nature and he realized to establish the educational institution for the benefit of the marginalized in specific and non-marginalized section of the society in general. As an advocate of the free universal education, for him, the educational institution ought to be agent of the social change and one of the strong pillar of the democracy. So, according to him, right to education and opportunity could not be sacrificed, as the education is the greatest material benefit, to achieve the higher education. Taking this particular into consideration, the availability of education through affirmative action in educational institution is unable to transform among the general sphere of the society. Education could not able to make it a public sphere, general sphere. It has been restricted the people. It has restricted the resources. So it become a very important aspect. The background of the student who are coming to the educational institute locates the caste location, lead to produce the alienation and the oppression, restrict in the formation of homogenized society. Until and unless, according to Ambedkar, if we will not annihilate the caste, or we will not, create a casteless society, we cannot create a homogeneous society. Some ethnographical studies, reveals the relationship between caste and education under the preview of educational institution. So the lack of role model and mentorship. There are lack of role models. The students are coming in the institution, but they don't know to whom we should ask. We should take, some other views so that they can develop, they can progress. So there is a lack of role model and mentorships. Harassment, difficulty to avail the scholarships, and passing marks, etc., are the major issue faced by the student from these communities. Such complexities, although express the experiential realities in educational institution, but unable to measure it due to its subjective in nature. Means what is subjective in nature? What we feel that there is operation, for other it may not be operation. So there is a subjectivity of standpoint. Thus it is necessary to examine the individual object in the context of the marginalized student. The educational institution, instead of becoming the liberal space, acts as a reversal order and accept the system of social inequality as a fate of life. It reminds Ambedkar vision on the function of the education, stating that utility of the education completely depends on the social location and the application of individual toward the caste nuances, isn't it? So in this backdrop, Dr. Ambedkar Chair, the Symbiosis International Deemed University, Pune, is organized this guest lecture to find out the relevance of the Ambedkar's idea on education and the caste in the contemporary modern educational system. So I feel that through this lecture, we can get a lot of reflection and we try to understand the Ambedkar's idea, education and the caste by understanding the present scenario. We maybe get a lot of reflection in that. So I welcome you, all of you, for here, and thanks to all of you, because now the hall is full. So I'm really happy that the hall is full. So thank you very much. Jai Bhim, Jai Bharat. Thank you.
Before we proceed, I'm joyous to share that this meeting is being conducted in a hybrid mode, and we are being joined by equal participants through the Zoom medium. So now I invite Dr. Hemangi Kadlak, who is assistant professor at Dr. Ambedkar Chair, to introduce the guest speaker and the chair for the program.
Thank you, Veer. So, first I would like to invite or introduce Professor Umesh Bagade, sir. So, Professor Umesh Bagade boasts an impressive academic profile. Having recently retired from the Department of History at Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University in Aurangabad. His educational journey includes earning his BA, MA, MPhil, and PhD degrees from Pune University, with his doctoral research focusing on religious thought in 19th century Maharashtra. His scholarly interests span the history of anti-caste movement, the intellectual and social history of modern Maharashtra, historiography, studies of caste economy, and the history of caste gender consciousness. Professor Bagade has authored, co-authored, edited, and co-edited numerous publications. Professor Bagade has held positions such as the director of the Rajashri Shahu Maharaj Research Center, where he facilitated workshops, seminars, and conferences on diverse social, academic, pedagogic, and research themes. He has also served on editorial boards for journals like Shivani and Samaj Prabodhan Patrika, contributed to university boards of studies, and acted as a member of the advisory board of the Center of Freedom Struggle at IGNOU, New Delhi. Additionally, Professor Bagade has enjoyed 3 terms of associateship at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, contributing significant research articles. He has presided over the Nana Patil Academy, leveraging it as a platform for collaborative intellectual interventions in social transformation. Professor Bagade has been honored with several prestigious awards for his scholarly contributions. Now, again, I invite Professor Surendra Jondre, who is the chair of the program. Professor Surendra Jondre, sir, holds a position as a professor in the Department of Civics and Politics and serves as a coordinator at the Dr. Ambedkar Center for Social Justice, University of Mumbai. His doctoral research focused on the Dalit movement in Maharashtra. He has a prolific author with numerous books and articles to his credit and has been sought after by the media for his insights as a political analyst. Professor Jondre has overseen numerous research projects and delivered multiple research papers at both national and international conferences and seminars. Additionally, he has fulfilled the role of chairman of the Board of Studies. Now, I think the time has come to start the main talk of Professor Umesh Bagade, sir. So now I invite Professor Bagade, a guest speaker of the program, to proceed with his insightful speech. Yeah, thank you.
Professor Zondre, Sanjuni Madam, Jyoti Madam, Chair Professor Ajay Chaudhary, scholars and friends. Majority of you might have seen Stroud's book, which explains the evolution of pragmatism in India. So Scott Stroud is taking up the idea that how Dewey was responsible, carrying influence in Ambedkar's thought. Particularly, he has cited Democracy and Education, the book of Dewey, when he has cited in the writing of Annals of the Caste. However, I will now begin with Kant. Stroud has written an interesting article where he claims that Kant is not against rhetoric. Stroud has interpreted Dr. Ambedkar as he is pursuing persuasive rhetoric. And this persuasive rhetoric is seen in the writings of Kant. And his article argues that Kant was not against rhetoric. Kant built rhetoric. So let us begin with Kant, what Kant says, because we will find that in Ambedkar's writing, there are phrases of Kant which appears. For example, education is defined as cultivation of mind. This is a phrase which Ambedkar uses in Buddha and his Dhamma. And you will find in the Kant's writing the term cultivation of mind. Interestingly, Kant talks in terms of education. He defines education as the humanization of mankind. That is the definition. Kant envisions education as cosmopolitan process. It is not individual achievement. It is a social process, it is a collective process. Whole generation are passing knowledge from one generation to another generation. So education has a collective cosmopolitan kind of process. That is what he talks about. So you will find that various kinds of aspect Kant is talking about. And the most important part is that the perfection of man is the end of education. So there is a grand kind of we can say position that which Kant envisages in the education is that man has to get developed and man's destiny has yet to attain. So this development and the destiny yet to attain should be proceeded through education. So education itself becomes a grand vision in the writings of Kant. Interestingly, one has to understand that Kant is the important thinker who has given us the idea of enlightenment. So in India, Phule, Shahu, Ambedkar, they all are product of enlightenment, Indian enlightenment. So necessarily one has to understand these kinds of ideas where in broader sense, Babasaheb Ambedkar has a direct kind of links with the enlightenment theory. One. So interestingly, we'll find there are certain kind of phrases and ideas which appears in Ambedkar's writing. For example, Kant defines practical education in terms of skills, imparting skills. Kant defines education in terms of giving the capacity of discretion. Kant defines education in terms of morality. So all such kinds of things will somehow get reflected in Ambedkar's writing. So interestingly, one has to see that rather than going to Stroud, we can somehow take some cues from Kant and could somehow situate what way Dr. Ambedkar is envisaging education. This is one point. Now, second point, important point, and that is being linked, is caste. Now, one has to understand that how caste is linked with enlightenment. Enlightenment has defined man only in terms of freedom. The essential feature of man is to be free. So, and freedom is inhuman. So, at all, if you have to humanize, then one has to be against the slavery. And you will find this impact, particularly in Phule's writing. Phule defines caste in terms of slavery. Caste is slavery. Tarabai Shinde defines patriarchy in terms of slavery. So this is a certain way of understanding human. If you have to humanize, if education has a certain kind of agenda of humanization, then there should not be these institutions. And you should somehow annul these institutions like patriarchy and caste. That becomes the agenda prior to Ambedkar. So that one has to understand that how caste was situated within the Enlightenment theory as slavery. So interestingly, all thinkers, particularly anti-caste thinkers, define caste in terms of slavery. So if you read Ambedkar, Ambedkar defines caste in terms of slavery. Ambedkar, particularly in his book, the 5th volume, compares this untouchability with slavery. He compares untouchability with certain kind of, we can say, processes of exclusion, which happens in religious communities like Jews, what Jews suffer, stigmatization, all such processes Ambedkar, you can say, maps. Interestingly, one has to understand this is the way Ambedkar understands caste. Now, we have to situate caste and education in terms that they are linked. And you all know that Ambedkar has given a massive kind of critique of Indian educational system. That is there in his writing, particularly Hindu philosophy. I think you should read his text, Hindu philosophy, where he offers critique of the Hindu educational system. He says the formal education, particularly the notion of formal education in India, is limited. It is only that Vedas should be studied. And you should know that in earlier kinds of, we can say, traditions, particularly traditional education system, only Vedas were imparted. So besides Veda, no education was given. That is the limitation of traditional Indian knowledge system or traditional educational system. Second thing one has to understand that he says that particularly the craft for artisan, we can take the example of blacksmith. Blacksmith was giving his kind of knowledge to his sons, but that was, literacy was not given to them. Particularly Shudras were denied education. And therefore you will find the kind of knowledge they were producing, the castes, particularly the practicing caste, those who are building, we can say, civilizations, those who are producing things, were not given educations, they were denied education. So mostly you will find that education could not came as corpus of knowledge. So the only idea of knowledge was limited, the only idea of education was limited to Vedas only. So broad secular, broad scientific, broad technological knowledge, what? Outside the pale of the system of knowledge and education. So this is his kind of critique. And now he, in certain sense, if you can read his book, Revolution and Counter-Revolution, and you will find that he investigates the process of Shudra being denied education. What is this process? Process is of inclusion. And by inclusion, exclusion is operated. Ambedkar defines that particularly Varna system, three Varnas were given right to education. Shudras were denied right to education. Why Shudras were denied right to education? There is a reason. The reason is noble. That these three Varnikas are guardians and Shudras are ward. तुमच्यापैकी काहींना मराठीत सांगतो, पाल्य आणि पालक संबंध. Father has the right to control. Why father has right to control? Because there is sense of good and bad which lives with parents, and children doesn't have that sense. बाल्यांना साधारणतः स्वतःचा विचार, स्वतःचा निर्णय घेण्याची भूमिका नाही. का नाही? कारण ते तसं निर्णय घेऊ शकत नाहीत. सो Trivarnikas has a right over the Shudras as Ward. And these Trivarnikas are the guardians. And this is an interesting kind of situations where the Shudras were included in Varna society. Shudras are included in Varna society. However, they are excluded from education. This is an interesting kind of situation where you will find if the knowledge is robbed by Brahmins, Shudra can't have a complaint. Those who are giving you protection, if they are robbing you, do you have any rights? And that is the condition which exists. Ambedkar in Analysis of the Caste explains this process. Ambedkar says that Shudras were doomed to be plowmen. Because they were reduced to be plowmen, they can't make swords out of the plows and they can't revolt. Because they were denied education, they can't know about their own kind of state, why they live in such an oppressive state. They can't have ideas of change. Therefore, the Shudras were forced to live in eternal slavery. In India, Shudras were doomed to be slaves basically because of denial to education. That is the understanding of Dr. Ambedkar. So interestingly, I won't go into details of it. He has given us, you can say, most massive kind of explanations about the way the Indian knowledge system operates in the particular kind of education system operates. I won't go into detail because we will be discussing more subtle aspects of his theory. So it is a critic. He's offering a critique of Indian knowledge system or education system. Now this second aspect, then how he was approaching the idea of education. If at all we can take up his interesting kind of article which he published when he was young enough, around 1970, he has published article on Russell. It's a book review of Russell. Reconstruction of Society, where he defines education in terms of behavioral psychology. You might be, some of you might be student of psychology. There was a kind of first school of behavioralism in psychology, and the man who has written a book called Thorndike, Educational Psychology. Ambedkar quotes this book in his article, Thorndike's book. What exactly Thorndike and Russell takes from this book? Russell or Thorndike are defining education in terms of modification. How it is being understood? As human beings, we are having impulses. We are having instincts. Particularly, our behavior is coming out of a certain kind of impulses and instincts. So what is exactly education? Education is a process of modifications. For example, I came in the stage, I'm giving you a speech and you are listening to me. This is a certain kind of modification to our instincts. This is being happened. These modifications are, in certain sense, are making mankind good. As this is a process of education, whatever I'm speaking to you, you are taking as knowledge. So this is a process where you are earning knowledge, and I, as a part of discussion with you, I am also earning some knowledge. So this is a process of knowledge making, and where you and me are modified. This whole process of modification has two aspects, that it could go to worse, it can go to better. So what is education then? Education is defined, understood as the worst part, the institutions, the circumstances which leads us to the worst aspect of mankind has to be rejected, has to be, in certain sense, get rid of, should be annulled. And the socially better things should be inculcated in us. So we should earn kind of society which could be, in certain way, could be better. And to get society better, the modification, there is a broad definition of education where you will find formal and informal educations are essentially involved in this. This is a modification. And Russell talks about how war, particularly war, world wars or every war, is carrying modification in human behavior. How family is carrying modification in its behavior. How education is carrying modification in its behavior. All such kinds of institutions, which in certain sense influence all of us, are now referred in his article that these are several kinds of institutions or kinds of phenomena which in certain sense shapes our behavior, our behavioral pattern. And here Ambedkar particularly takes a certain kind of take of particularly Devi, and here you will find the influence of Devi, which is invoked in his article, that force not as violence, force as the energy. So in Ambedkar's writing, particularly this instrument of force is being envisaged, and now this force has to be understood. In a certain sense, we should engage with this idea of force. I will somehow discuss about in later part of my speech, but this is an important aspect he talks about. Now let us come to his engagement with the idea of knowledge. Particularly if take Dewey in certain sense invokes experience, and particularly his kind of education method is being utilized particularly because of the function of experience being brought in education. So experience is very instrumental in education, as Professor Chaudhary was talking about. This experiences should be part of education system. So we learn through experiences by doing things. Child learns through doing things. We know things through doing things. So this is a certain kind of experiences which in certain sense gives us a kind of corpus of knowledge. So experience is brought within the structure of education. Now, interestingly, we can take this particular kind of experience in ancient times. Gautam Buddha particularly talked about what are the sources of knowledge. Gautam Buddha has cited three sources. One is obviously Shabda Pramanya or Veda Pramanya, where word can lead to knowledge. Particularly, the Bible would lead to knowledge, the Quran would lead to knowledge, Jendavesta would lead to knowledge, Vedas would lead to knowledge. This is a certain kind of, we can say, belief on which the knowledge is being envisaged. Word can lead to knowledge. This is one kind of way of deriving knowledge. The second kind of path of deriving knowledge is logic. Logic is very instrumental. And you should know that particularly Kant has defined knowledge in terms of synthetic judgment a priori. Means logic is essentially kind of force which brings to knowledge. So ground on which we gain knowledge is logic. So all mathematics, all formulas, science, you will find is furnished through logic. So logic is a very, you can say, essential part of knowledge. This is the second kind of aspect of knowledge. This particularly logic can lead to knowledge. And third is experience. Interestingly, Gautam Buddha gives us a qualifying kind of the essential premise how experience can lead to knowledge. And he says that because you are conditioned, all of us are conditioned, And we earn experiences through conditioning. Let us take example of my childhood days. This might be with you also. Women who is suffering, women who is oppressed, would understand her experience in term of भोग, fate. तुमच्यापैकी काहींना माहिती असेल की स्त्रिया आपल्या दुःखाचा, वेदनेचा, कष्टाचा अनुभव घेताना काय म्हणतात? भोग आहेत भोग. Her existence is conditioned by ideas which govern her, and because that idea governs her, her experience is marred, and therefore she cannot reach to knowledge. So if at all you are conditioned by certain ideologies, certain kind of cultural structures, institutions, then you can't earn knowledge through experience. Experience is no guarantee to knowledge. I will cite this example particularly of Chokha Mela. Chokha Mela was a great saint in medieval times. He has a great brain, and you might be knowing about his abhangas, his kinds of writings, and it was fabulous. This man has raised a revolt in medieval times and said that if the birth is source of pollution, everybody is then polluted. Why only untouchables are polluted? This is the argument offered by this man. But when he talks about his own existence of being Mahar, he says, मागच्या जन्मी कृष्णनिंदा घडली म्हणून महाराजन प्राप्ती. Because in previous birth I have cursed Lord Krishna, therefore I have been doomed to have this birth of Mahar. So this is a fatalism. This fatalism comes through conditioning. The prerequisite which Buddha puts up, that prerequisite that you should uncondition yourselves. You should uncondition yourselves. So interestingly, this idea of knowledge through experience only can come if we can annul the influences of caste, influences of patriarchy. म्हणजे तुमच्यावरती जे जातीचे, तुमच्यावरती जे पितृसत्तेचे प्रभाव आहेत, ते प्रभाव तुम्ही दूर केले नाहीत तर तुमचा अनुभव हा तुम्हाला ज्ञानापर्यंत घेऊन जाणार नाही. That is what he was arguing about, interestingly. So this particular idea of experience is invoked in Buddha and his Dhamma. Ambedkar says that Buddha defined knowledge in terms of experience. Buddha defined knowledge in terms of use. This is what Ambedkar writes about in Buddha and his Dhamma. One, he says that the Hinduism or Brahmanism claims ultimate truth, ultimate knowledge. They say that ultimate knowledge is with them. Buddha says no knowledge is final. And now, being in Symbiosis University, you all know that knowledge is not final. It is all the time evolving. This is the world is not created, but the world is evolving. So this whole idea of knowledge being evolving is being taken from Buddha. So you'll find how Ambedkar was defining knowledge in terms of Buddha and particularly in terms of experience. Interestingly, Ambedkar gives a very positive aspect of Brahminical knowledge. He says that Brahminical knowledge has three important facets, and that any knowledge system should have. One, that is comprehension. Means whenever you are learning, you should have these kinds of things with you. Comprehension, akalan. The second thing is memory. And third thing is that the what you have learned, you can put it into use. This is the three aspects which Brahminical knowledge have. What exactly the new aspect Ambedkar brings in? The new aspect which Ambedkar brings in this, that analysis and newness. You should criticize the existing corpus of knowledge, existing epistemes, so in such a way that you can now produce new knowledge. You should have doubt about your own knowledges. Without having just memorizing won't help, and putting that memory into use won't help. You should have criticism. You should have critical mindset. Without criticism, without analysis, without doubt, you cannot produce new paradigms of knowledges. So to bring new paradigms of knowledges, you should have a certain kind of criticism. So Ambedkar quotes Buddhism for criticism. Ambedkar quotes Buddhism as a knowledge, as conduct. He has defined knowledge and prajna. What is knowledge? I already told you. What is prajna? Prajna is insight. Vidya is knowledge. He is using the existing terminology. Vidya is knowledge and prajna is insight. And Ambedkar's harp upon that prajna is essential. And essentially, prajna cannot subsist without shield conduct. If I am a teacher, if I won't teach, if I don't take effort to teach, is it my conduct? So one has to understand that this prajna has to be subsisted by shield, that is conduct. So interesting kinds of facet he is adding to it, that any kind of corpus of knowledge has to have a social good. It can be logically correct. You can have logics which can be influential enough to be accepted. But logic should be tested on the ground of social good. That is what he was arguing for. And he is picking these ideas from Buddha in his Dhamma. So he is taking these kinds of ideas. Now we'll pick up a kind of paradox which he offers when he's giving a certain kind of his views on education, particularly in his very important kind of small essay in 5th volume, Warning to Untouchable. This is an interesting kind of piece he writes, Warning to Untouchables. In Warning to Untouchables, he takes up reasons. And now one has to understand what exactly you are learning from, particularly in social sciences or in sciences. You are learning reason, mostly reason. You have to understand what you are earning through knowledge, what you are earning through education. And you will find that mostly you are earning logics, reasons. Interestingly, there are several logics which are offered vis-a-vis caste. So essentially, the Marxists have offered interesting kind of logic, but reason to annihilate caste. What is their logic? That industrialism and capitalism will break caste. And it will diminish, it will decimate caste. Ambedkar says, no way. Capitalism, the speed up capitalism, the speed up industrialism can't break caste. It is automatism. You are now perceiving that industrialism and capitalism will take rid of caste. It's not taking place. And even today, as a student of social sciences or commerce, you definitely know that caste is not vanishing. So this is a kind of reason which is offered by the Marxist as learned reason. Then another reason, particularly Kant, we have a certain kind of belief, and that belief has a ground. that all kinds of social injustices are due to superstitions. So education should break superstitions. And the reason particularly will break the superstitions. So if at all we have to bring change in society, we are having a certain kind of program of reason, rationalization. And rationalization would lead to fighting caste. It will lead to annihilating caste. That could be a logic. And that logic was harped upon. And while we are somehow talking about education, we will be talking about this, that education should be imparted. The spirit of education will get rid of caste. Is it happening? Have these ideas have any kind of impact in Indian society? Reason as a kind of process is it is taking kind of get rid of caste? No. Why? Dr. Ambedkar explains that the Brahmins are the most advanced community who are educated. Brahmins are most educated. As a part of reason, they know that untouchability is unreasonable. It's very easy to understand. And you will find that when Ambedkar was talking, so many Brahmins' homes and were practicing untouchability. Ambedkar was not allowed to enter into their houses. So those who were having great education, those who had gone to Cambridge, those who went to various places, educated Brahmins are not showing any kind of change in their behavior. Why? Ambedkar defines interesting aspect, that interest. Ambedkar says there are three aspects Ambedkar defines, particularly two aspects. One is the sense of self. Caste gives a position of self. So if I am great, why I am great? Because untouchables are polluted, they are stigmatized, they are low, they are inferior. If untouchables are inferior, then without doing anything I am great. The feeling of greatness is acquired through the very existence of untouchables. So no Savarna would take any kind of position against caste, basically because he thinks he is to be high. Only when he could be high, when there is untouchability persisting. Understood? This is a certain kind of condition, one thing. Second thing, and that is very important, that caste as a system is having a structure of forced labor. The untouchables are the laboring class which are least paid. Economic interest, sheer economic interest. You won't imagine the kind of remuneration given to untouchables, Mahars. Ambedkar has given 5 articles in Bahishkrit Bharat, where he argues that the untouchable Mahar's labor is not quantified. Mahar's labor is not remunerative. It is forced labor. It is least paid labor. So these all conditions persist. Now one has to understand that what exactly happens when education being given, education being imparted. Education in certain sense transforms consciousness. Is it not? Education transforms consciousness. What is consciousness? Ambedkar explains us the structure of consciousness. There are 3 aspects of consciousness. One is cognitive aspect of consciousness. Second is emotional aspect of consciousness. And third is holistical aspect of consciousness. Now to try to understand this thing. Why you are listening to me? There is a cognition that lecture is going on. Professor Bagade is called to give lecture. So you are listening to me. So there is a cognitive consciousness. There could be emotive consciousness. Because my lecture is too loaded with theory, you might see it is boring. So some are leaving the place. So this is the holitional, emotive and holitional kind of consciousness. So you have various kinds of layers of consciousness: cognitive, emotive, and holitional. But interestingly, these consciousness are built around self, idea of self. So most of you know that you are having idea of self. Girls are having idea of self being girls. Boys are having the idea of self as being boys. You are having your ideas of being students. All these ideas are not acquired by yourselves. These ideas are acquired through a corpus of knowledge, pre-existing. And where you get interest. The idea of interest comes through a system of social identities. And these social identities are structured in a system called caste. It is structured through a system called class. This is structured through a system called patriarchy, within which you get a certain kind of consciousness of self. And therefore, you have to understand that although you know that caste is a lie, caste is a lie, you know that untouchability is a wrong, we can say, bygone system, although you will practice this basically because it serves your interest. It serves yourself. So this is a certain kind of structure within which Dr. Ambedkar explains the efficacy of education. So Ambedkar, in certain sense, says that religion and the agency of religion and agency of reason won't annihilate caste. Neither the agency of religion, neither the agency of reason would annihilate caste. म्हणजे तुम्ही केवळ विवेकवादामुळे किंवा धर्माच्या आधारे जात नष्ट करू शकत नाही. मग काय आहे? And interesting. In this process, it is interesting that Ambedkar defines education in terms of revolt. That if at all you could reject the lie of caste, you could reject the lie of patriarchy, then and then this whole kind of moment of insurgency could happen in your consciousness. And if at all this insurgent consciousness operates, then and then education can be helpful. In any way, of any caste, Savarna or non-Savarna, untouchables or non-untouchables, women or can say men, all of those, if they can have this insurgent moment, that they could reject the lie. And interestingly, Phule, Ambedkar are having their ideas, particularly of avidya, linked to Buddhism. Ambedkar in Buddha in his Dhamma categorically argues that Buddhism is against avidya. What is avidya? Your notions of caste, your notions of patriarchy. You operate. Why your sisters? Relationship, family relationship. Brothers will be brothers. Brothers have to protect the sisters. Sister has to be subordinate. Brothers has to be dominant. Brothers will have right over the property. Sisters won't have right over the property. This is the structures. And so interestingly, one has to understand that Dr. Ambedkar was making this point, that if at all this avidya, you have to abolish, you have to annihilate these all kinds of avidyas. And therefore, there is an interesting kind of way Phule and Ambedkar both are envisaging the idea of avidya to carry out education. Means without their idea of avidya, you can't impart education. As Phoenicia. तुम्हाला सगळ्यांना माहिती आहे की शिक्षणातून सगळं परिवर्तन होणार आहे. ते परिवर्तन तेव्हा शक्य आहे when you will annul avidya. So, as Buddha has put a precondition that you should uncondition yourselves. Similarly, there is a prerequisite in Dr. Ambedkar's process of education that you should, in certain sense, uncondition yourselves from avidya. When you will uncondition yourself from avidya, then and then the process of education will be revolutionary. It will bring the modification as we are expecting. Modification in our behavior, which will be enriching the society, which will be enriching the country. These modifications, these changes only could happen through a certain kind of this process of abolishing avidya. And this is a very important aspect which Ambedkar talks about. I won't invoke his all ideas. For example, he was in favor of mass education. You know that he rejected the all kinds of structures, colonial structure, criticized all the structures, particularly his idea of university, his idea of teacher, his idea of student. All such ideas are very meaningful. Means the way he was unfolding pedagogy, particularly even one can take a very interesting kind of topic. When I was reading it, history as a method of education. Ambedkar was making an interesting kind of exercise that how history could be brought in a process of education. He was taking up education, particularly history education, as inquiry. Take any kind of text of Dr. Ambedkar, and you will find that he takes inquiry. Secondly, logic. Inquiry and logic unfolding, making present. So the knowledge of present would be built through inquiry and unfolding of the logic of the past. So it's very great in Ambedkar's writing. Ambedkar has written profusely on history, revolution, counter-revolution. All kinds of his writings are mostly historical. So history as a tool of knowledge, history as a tool of education, you will find the way he was criticizing examination system, particularly universities are reduced to be examining centers. Universities should be teaching the universities and researching universities. We can say, envisaging the students to be those who are knowing the learning process, the logic and the whole kind of truth. So various kinds of ways Dr. Ambedkar was defining knowledge. Ambedkar was defining education. Ambedkar was defining social change, and particularly the change which he envisaged, that anti-caste revolution. I will stop here because I have taken much time, and in question answer session I will take your questions and answer it. I thank Professor Chaudhary for inviting me to give this lecture. I thank you all for patiently listening to me. Thank you very much.
I now invite the chair, Professor Subhendra Jondale, to share his words and moderate. So I open the session. I open the session for question and answer, and the audience can ask their queries or share their views on it. Language is not a barrier. You can share in Marathi, Hindi, English, any language that you want to.
Uh, can I ask? I'm online.
Okay.
Hello,
Hello.
hello. I'm Dr. Alka.
Hello.
I'm Dr. Alka here. Can I ask question?
Yes. Yes, I am listening.
Uh, thank you very much, sir, for your insightful speech. It was very informative. But it is not a question actually. I want to say that in annihilation of caste, Dr. Baba Sahib says that caste is a notion, and to remove the caste from the mind, there should be notional change. Unless there is notional change, it cannot be removed from the mind. And the Hindu people are not wrong, but they are very religious. And the religion, Shastras, it is their teaching in the Shastras to mind, to follow the caste system and the inequality, everything. And so they have to destroy the teaching of these Shastras. That was the ultimate message of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar.
I will respond in various ways. That part which I have not spoken. One is this, that how Ambedkar defined caste and how Ambedkar defined education. So this is a kind of implication of defining caste on education. For example, Ambedkar defines caste as slavery. You will find Ambedkar defines education as freedom. So you will find there are two ways the human beings are caged. One is that you are by truncated experiences, and secondly, you are in certain sense bounded by a certain kind of wrong reason. So, to all, what exactly education can do? Education will somehow annihilate these limitations, bindings on the knowledge. So in certain sense, to free mankind from different kind of cages, different kind of bondages, education is essential. So interestingly, Dr. Ambedkar defines education in terms of freedom. Secondly, Ambedkar particularly defines caste as a system of superiority and inferiority. The high caste have a superiority complex and the low caste can have inferiority complex. So when he was talking about the foundation of Millen College, he has spoken that the education is essential to annihilate the sense of inferiority in low castes. So you will find that as he was defining caste in terms of inferiority, superiority, he was in certain sense defining education in these terms. Ambedkar was defining inequalities, caste inequalities in three ways. Ambedkar, particularly in analytical caste, has given us three kinds of inequalities. One inequality is the genetical inequality. Second is the inequality which is coming through a certain kind of lineage. And third is inequality acquired by your own efforts. Particularly, therefore, Ambedkar defines education in terms of offering culture and social capital. So caste is a system which is having a certain kind of corpus of cultural capital, and there is a hierarchy of cultural capital and social capital. So for equalization, there is need to have this process of giving cultural and social capital. So all such ways you will find the way he was defining caste, the way he was defining education. So they are interlinked. So yes, it is right that Dr. Ambedkar defined caste as notion, but that doesn't mean Ambedkar has not identified the economic aspect of it. And therefore, I told you that in his kind of speech, in his text called Warning to Untouchable, he defines interest in terms of economics. So that has to be understood.
Sorry.
Sir, you said three Varnikas are like guardians, or for that matter, Shudras would like be children who were guardian by three Varnas. But then if we study the Kant and ethics of the Kant, one of the main pillar of the ethics is justice. But from your lecture also, the word justice or the sense of justice was absent in the fact that can justice lead to education or vice versa? And if that's the case, why the sense of justice is not included in this?
Very interesting question, very important question. See, caste is understood in terms of injustice. So education is seen as in terms of justice. That has to be understood. So social injustice is caste, and education is nothing but to offer social justice. And therefore, the very idea of reservation or affirmative action comes through education. Through education, you will see these kinds of ideas coming in. So interestingly, Ambedkar defines justice in a broader sense, where in India there are justice, traditional justice, which are defined in Manu. And therefore, if at all you have to understand Ambedkar's sense of justice, one has to understand the traditional sense of justice. Interestingly, you will see that, for example, Manu defines justice that in terms of, for example, he says that the wife, the son, and Shudras are adhanas, that they are devoid of money, they are devoid of property. Why? As you have mentioned, because the pati is the swami, pati is the owner, and patni is the servant. So in that sense, whatever is earned by patni is earned by son, is the ward, and because ward works under the parent, therefore whatever is achieved by the son is owned by the father. Thirdly, Shudra is slave, and everything is earned by Shudra, therefore owned by the swami, that is the Brahmin or the Trivarnikas. Now you have to understand this whole predicament. Then there comes Medhatithi. Medhatithi argues that he is the commentator of Manu. How he argues? He said that these are earnings of individuals, so they should have right. Means wife should have right, son should have right, Shudra should have right. Now, interestingly, he excludes Shudra, only takes example of two, wife and son. And now, interestingly, one can understand that what happens today, even today, if any position earned by woman, particularly in local self-government, is controlled by her husband. So this is a nyaya, traditional justice. So this traditional justice is seen as injustice. And there this whole departure comes through. Then this whole idea of equality becomes essential. So Ambedkar defined justice as liberty, equality. The other name of justice is equality, fraternity. These are the three essential terms for the justice. So Ambedkar defines justice in this way.
Yeah, so thank you, Professor Bagade, for this interesting lecture. Actually, I don't have a question. It is more or less a shared anxiety. Not being able to deal with this anxiety. And today I figured that also talked along similar lines, and I thought maybe I should share this anxiety with you so that possibly if you have some way out of it, maybe that will help me. So you very interestingly began with Stroud and then went to Kant, interestingly, to figure out certain conceptual relations between Ambedkar and Kant on education. But such kinds of like very influential, I'll not say comparisons, interventions, had they been happening in a purely hermeneutic space, it would have been very interesting. But unfortunately, since Kant, Devi, they come from the West, this space is not purely hermeneutic. This space, on the other hand, is hegemonic, where automatically the moment I invoke Kant, I invoke Devi for studying Ambedkar, for studying Phule, for studying anyone for that matter from the Eastern academia, it becomes as if automatically it is granting Ambedkar or granting Phule or granting Muzumdar or anyone some sort of legitimacy into the world that, interestingly here, what Ambedkar says has earlier been guarded by the Trivarnas, is now guarded by the global West or the global East-West divide. Now, unfortunately, since we are all post-British, part of post-British Indian academia, there is no way out of it because the Western academics is into our curriculum. But at the same time, this pure hermeneutic space, like it should have been the case that I'm using Kant just to substantiate something, but that substantiation becomes a kind of Foucauldian legitimation of turning Ambedkar into something which may not have been possible if Kant would not have been there. So is there a way out to out of this hegemonic dependence? That's it. Because I have been suffering
there are several kinds of various kinds of power dimensions are there when we are invoking Western, particularly Western thinkers. And there is no kind of, we can say, clear answer to it. Because as a student of history or student of social science, we have to situate the ideas of our thinkers, from where these ideas comes, as well as from Western tradition, as well as Eastern tradition. So one has to situate Dr. Ambedkar within the world of ideas. However, when we are invoking Indian tradition as well as Western tradition, there is a certain kind of trap. And that trap has to be understood. And Professor is somehow pointing out that trap. And I do agree with him that there is a trap. And this trap has to, for example, when I was studying particularly Maharashtrian enlightenment, I could somehow understand that the way Orientalism is defined, there are problems of Orientalism. And I could somehow see that the whole Orientalism was not product of West. This is a Brahminical kind of conception of knowledge, which is now legitimized as the Orientalism. So interestingly, this is not a certain kind of the one kind of, we can say, hegemony, but it is the Brahminical hegemony, not only Western hegemony, but the Brahminical hegemony is part of it. So interestingly, while somehow locating Dr. Ambedkar, we should come with certain kind of subtle nuances of it. Means why I'm doing so. Means, for example, why I'm locating Kant and not Stroud. Basically, because I have a certain say to Stroud, because Stroud has defined Ambedkar in terms of Devi. And as if Dr. Ambedkar was nobody than a kind of extension of Devi. So I have this problem. I won't accept the kind of argument which Stroud offers. And therefore, I am offering Kant basically because how he is making a certain kind of game where Kant is 18th century thinker, and he argues that Kant has rhetoric. He identifies a rhetoric in Devi, and to substantiate the rhetoric of Devi, he identifies rhetoric in Kant. So if at all this is a certain kind of politics which is playing, I'm pointing out this politics. Rather than of quoting Kant, I am pointing out the politics of Stroud. Moreover, secondly, interestingly, he also has acknowledged, but there are more nuance and subtle aspect to it, that yes, there are doing impact on Ambedkar. However, because Ambedkar has his own kind of take on caste, and particularly Indian tradition, he was fighting against caste. No one can reduce his philosophy as pragmatism. Basically, because when he is talking about Buddhism, he was essentially fighting against the Brahminical idea of truth. So one cannot fight Brahminical idea of truth with pragmatism. And therefore, Ambedkar was going beyond pragmatism. Although he has certain kind of influences which he carries in his writing, he was going beyond pragmatism. And one has to accept this, that he was going against pragmatism. And therefore, I mean, my exercise would not be getting into traps. However, as you are a student of philosophy, we all are, in certain sense, prone to go into traps. Thanks for this question.
Thank you, sir. It was nice lecture. आपने कांट और कांट के सार्वभौमिकरण सिद्धांत के संदर्भ में और पुले वगैरह इसके संदर्भ में बात की. बहुत अच्छा व्याख्यान था. इसके थ्रू अंबेडकर के एजुकेशन व्यू को समझने की कोशिश की हुई. लास्ट में आपने एक बात कही कि हिस्ट्री इज मेथड ऑफ एजुकेशन. मतलब अंबेडकर इतिहास को अत्यंत महत्वपूर्ण मानते हैं शिक्षा के बारे में. और जब हम पोस्ट मॉडर्न थिंकर्स और फेनोमेना को देख रहे हैं, जिसमें फूको एंड अदर थिंकर्स कह रहे हैं कि एंड ऑफ हिस्ट्री, एंड ऑफ हिस्ट्री, एंड ऑफ नॉलेज की बात आ रही है, एंड ऑफ आइडियाज का जो विचार आ रहा है, तो वो जो आइडियोलॉजीज आ रही है, इस आइडियोलॉजी को अंबेडकर के किन विचारों के द्वारा हम समझ सकते हैं, और अंबेडकर के कौन से विचार इसको एंड ऑफ हिस्ट्री और ये जो विचारधारा इसको समझने के लिए
in terms of dealing this question, means he is asking a question where he wants to get explanation about how Ambedkar operates history into pedagogy. Broadly, one has to understand that history, in certain sense, unfolds repetitions. Means mostly, if at all you are engaging with history, what exactly you are doing? You are looking for patterns. Patterns are similar looking. For example, if you take up example of Marxism, what Marxism is doing? Marxism is locating the changes in means of production. So there is a pattern of understanding history, and these patterns are linked with repetitions. So Ambedkar has his own take, particularly different than of Marxism, is that Ambedkar is doing history in terms of psychology. And therefore, exactly the question which appeared, that Ambedkar defined caste as a notion. And so interestingly, we'll find that therefore Ambedkar unfolds the patterns of history in terms of psychology. If at all you can understand his important text, unfinished text, sadly it's very unfinished text, but it is important text, that is Revolution, Counter-Revolution. And you will find that patterns, repetitions. And if at all you can understand Buddhism as revolution and Brahmanism as counter-revolution, and he in certain sense interprets Indian history in terms of revolution, counter-revolution. So he defines the present situation as counter-revolution. So interestingly, what is the take where we could now confront postmodernism? Postmodernisms, in certain sense, have their ideas that truth, there is no one truth. Truths could be in discourses. So they don't believe in idea of truth. They compare literature and history as one and the same. So there can be different we can say literary expressions. Similarly, there can be different histories. Interestingly, one has to understand that Ambedkar, therefore I said that Ambedkar is candid, that he takes the position of truth, historical truth. So it is a kind of, we can say, departure, as many are interpreting Ambedkar in terms of Foucault, that as if Ambedkar is, in certain sense, giving some ideas which are closer to postmodernism. It's not there. For Ambedkar, history is truth. It is not absolute truth. One has to understand this. Ambedkar was not talking in terms of truth, basically because his idea of knowledge is not finite. It is finite. He says it is not final. So as a process of reaching to truth, he is antithetical to postmodernist vision. So if at all we take that one point, that could be, I think, enough to understand Ambedkar's position towards history. Fine.
I was just wondering, one is, I feel that the human, I do enjoy the talk. What I'm thinking is the human inability to become self-critical of, thank you. The human inability to become self-critical of their primordial identities fails the radicalism of education.
True, you are right. You are right. You are right. You are right.
One peripheral point could be, it could be because we are more and more professionalizing our approach to education just to get a job or just to settle down, etc. So it's a kind of an instrumental approach towards it. This is one part of the problem. Second part of the problem is when we say Socratic method of what Dr. Ambedkar was visualizing could be practiced, are we, as the followers of the subaltern Ambedkarite tradition, or self-critical of our own, is the challenge I'm actually thinking. Say, for example, somehow I feel that I may be wrong. We are also idolizing him, actually. We are not, we are not engaging with him critically. Or the entry into a room without a shoe, for example, right? Are we questioning this, actually? Are we critical of ourselves? Are we, like, say, for example, 9-8 years of plutocratic populism, how many of us are all critical of this plutocratic populism? Where are the silence? Why are we silent against this monstrous alliance, for example? What is the radical potentiality Dr. Ambedkar might have done today, right? So what could be your take on it?
I accept your position. I agree with your position. Yes. When Ambedkar was invoking Buddha, he categorically said that Buddha has said that be the disciple of my religion. माझ्या कालातीत धम्माचे अनुसरण करा, कालबाह्य धम्माचे नव्हे. Means you follow my ideology which is relevant for this time. Whichever is not relevant to this time should be rejected. And I follow Buddha. Similarly, the disciple of Ambedkar also should follow Ambedkar as Ambedkar has followed Buddha. That those ideas which are relevant, only that ideas should be in certain sense put into practice, and those ideas of Ambedkar one should be critical of. Similarly, it is very important, Ambedkar, while talking about self-culture, interesting. When Ambedkar was envisaging Buddhism, Ambedkar was talking about morality. And the point which he was raising was very much there, that until we are not critical of ourselves, until we are not critical of our agency, until we are not critical about the whole kind of modality of change, we can't have any kind of way that we could bring education as emancipatory. So interestingly, this whole notion of self-culture, particularly critical cultures, and where conduct is essential part of the philosophy. And interestingly, the critique particularly is essential to it. Has to be, in certain sense, we should pick that ideas, we should develop that ideas as to offer a certain kind of self-critique, where we should not fall into primordial kinds of identities and kind of, we can say, systems within which we are engrossed. And we should not only, as would be taking skills from education and in certain sense getting achievements through educations. So this is not only class elevation, it is for annihilation of the caste. Until we are not going for this whole kind of, we can say, political philosophy of anti-caste revolution, and particularly the interesting kind of take of Ambedkar, particularly about self-culture and self-criticality, which is essential to self-culture, we can't, in certain sense, take up the whole kind of, we can say, fight against the system which is now, we can say, coming with more kind of power on us. So I accept this broadly. Okay.
It was a very enlightening question and answer session. So I now invite Professor Surendra Jondale to share his views.
Professor Umesh Bagade and distinguished audience. At the outset, I would like to thank Professor Ajay Chaudhary for inviting me for this very, one can say, foundational lecture conducted, first lecture, foundational lecture of Dr. Ambedkar chair. So I congratulate him, and also I congratulate the management of Symbiosis University. Before I start my presidential remarks, in fact, these are not the presidential remarks. I'll be just sharing certain concerns with you, and I'm not going to comment on Professor Umesh Bagade's presentation just because we are the fellow travelers. So there is no any dispute about his making some very brilliant arguments or, in his presentation. Only slightly I will differ, not differ, but I will discuss with him later on about John Dewey's influence on Ambedkar and the way he was trying to connect with Kant, and that's a really serious and very complex situation that I will catch up with him later. But I will make just small comment, short comment in my presentation, how Dewey played a very significant role in Ambedkar's intellectual career. But before that, I will read out some news items which had appeared in the newspaper to make you realize in which an unequal world we are living. Because this is very important. What is the state of affairs? What is the status? What is the situation of education in India today? So recently, the interim union budget 2024 was presented in the Lok Sabha. And what was the budgetary provision for higher education? I'll just read out the news which has appeared in the Indian Express. In the interim budget of 2024, the UGC allocation saw a cut of little over 50% with just rupees 2,500 crore allocation for the financial year 2024-25 from the 5,360 crores in 2023-24. 23-24 budget estimate. So it is the 50% reduction in the budget for the higher education, which was, presented in the interim budget. This provision was made. This comes at a time when the new education policy is going to be implemented. Second, for Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, allocation increased marginally by rupees 465 crores from 37,453 crore to rupees 37,500 crore in 2024-25. So for Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, there was just rupees 465 crore increase in the budget. So you can just think what is the attitude or opinion of the central government towards the higher education or the education as such. Secondly, the latest ASER report reveals that 25% of 14 to 18-year-olds cannot read a standard 2 textbook. 43% cannot do standard 3 sums. Most students study humanities. This is hardly by choice. Few schools are equipped for science teaching. Why I read out these two news items? For the simple reason, Dr. Ambedkar had referred the less budgetary provision for the primary education as well as the higher education when he was the member of the Mumbai, Prantik Sabha. So he had raised the same issues for the expenses on the education. And he also said that why the scheduled caste students, or in fact, that was not the term which was used very extensively. He said untouchable students, the different caste students, they were more, inclined to take education in the humanities, but not in the science and technology. For the simple reason that was not affordable to them. And so still today, this concern of Dr. Ambedkar is relevant. So Ambedkar is not lost, or he has not, his concerns or his ideas are not lost even in the contemporary times. Now, second issue, because we are talking on Dr. Ambedkar's ideas, views on education and caste. So I'll ask a simple question: Are many people feel that does caste exist in society? This is the for some very crucial question. Does it exist? And I'll read again the news from the newspapers. A young woman from the Kallar community in Tamil Nadu's Tanjavur district was allegedly killed by her family for marrying a Dalit man. The incident took place on January 3. The victim, 19-year-old Aishwarya from Navaduti in Pattukottal, had fallen in love with Naveen, a 19-year-old Dalit man from Pudukudur village, Tanjavur. Naveen belongs to the Devendra Kulla Vellar community, a scheduled caste, while Aishwarya hailed from the Kallar backward community, a dominant caste and subgroup of the Thevar community. Second news item. A sub-inspector of the Junagadh B Division Police has been booked for attempt to murder following the alleged custodial torture that led to the death of 43-year-old Dalit man in a hospital Wednesday morning. Then there is another concern, another comment. This appears again in the Indian Express. At workplace, when you are the designated Dalit. This article is written by Vaibhav Wankide, and he writes in his article, Wankhede, what is your caste? I was asked in the interview, even before I started working full time, you are a Marathi and you don't celebrate Ganpati, goes another one. Casteism is so ingrained into daily work lives that it has become an invisible entity, yet something which is proudly flaunted. The casteist desertion of urban corporate spaces under the pretext of progressive culture goes by legitimizing the dominant religion at workplace. So these are the incidents which tell you the fact, the reality, social reality of the caste, and what is the situation, what are the conditions of education and the state of affairs, social affairs in the country, in the contemporary times. I would like to just share two anecdotes when I'm visiting this very prestigious institute. Long back in 2001, when I was at the University of Pune, I had organized one international conference reconstructing the world, Dr. Ambedkar's understanding of Buddhism. And that time, this institute, the professor the management, the chairperson of this management had hosted lunch for those international delegates. So I'm just in a nostalgic mood to remember Professor Muzumdar's gracious help at that time. Secondly, that is more academic. Professor Bagade had mentioned about Professor Scott S. Stroud. In fact, Professor Scott Stroud had discovered two books in the library of this institute. And those two books are, and these are the personal collections of Dr. Ambedkar from where he, to use his word, cache. He just discovered these two books at this library. John Davies' essays in experimental logic, which was published in 1953, and Joseph Ratner's book, he has edited that, Collection of Selection from John Davies' work, Intelligence in the Modern World, John Davies' Philosophy. So what I would like to say is that this institute is associated with this important collection of Dr. Ambedkar books, and so I feel that this my humble gratitude to be expressed in this program. Before I talk about Dr. Ambedkar's view on caste and education, what I would like to tell you in very, very, very specific words, the question of caste is very much connected with identity, rights, dignity, representation, and recognition. And Dr. Ambedkar has dealt with all these features of the caste in a very detailed, in very critical way. And he also talked about the character of the caste system. And what is the characteristics of the caste system? Again, I will just narrate that. Purity, pollution, discrimination, humiliation, exclusion, exploitation, injustice, hierarchy, subordination, inequality, and separation and segregation. So all these issues, all these themes were dealt by Dr. Ambedkar in his writing. And when he talked about untouchability, he said that there are three basic dimensions, aspects of untouchability, and that is exclusion, humiliation, subordination, and exploitation. when Dr. Ambedkar was talking about these issues, some questions should be asked. And before that, I would like to tell you, I would like to explain when he undertook the first satyagraha, Mahar Satyagraha for that Chaudhar tank in 1927. What was the what was the major concern for undertaking that satyagraha? It was not just going and fetch the water, from that tank which was opened by the Nagarpalika. It was not just confined to that. We should not underestimate the significance of that event. What was involved in that? What were the aspects of that satyagraha? One, it was the declaration of norms of equality for the first time. Because, it was argued that now untouchables have got right to fetch the water, to drink the water from that tank, because now it is opened by the Nagarpalika. It is a government. It is now public tank. So anyone cannot. The orthodox people cannot restrict untouchables from drinking water from that tank. Secondly, it was also an assertion of citizenship rights. So it was not just, the Nagarpalika has opened, so the Dalits will go there and fetch the water. It was also telling, it was in a way assertion of citizenship right. We are a citizen of this Mahar city, and we have got right to fetch water from this tap which is opened by the Nagarpalika. And also at the same time, it was also the announcement of idea of humanity. So we are the human beings, and you cannot discriminate. The orthodox section of the Hindu society cannot keep us away from using that water, from drinking that water. So these were the aspects of that great event which radicalized Ambedkar movement in later times. So what I feel that, I'm going to just raise certain question, and these questions are for you to just ponder, to just rethink, reconsider, to just analyze. And what are these questions? The first question, and I will just take some of the questions, whether the caste is a political category, whether the untouchability was addressed as a radically exploitative practice, whether the forces of modernity have or would erase, abolish the caste system, how constitutional equality, social mobility, and sharing of public spaces have affected caste as a notion. As Ambedkar said, it is a state of mind. Whether the policy of affirmative action has erased the caste as a system, whether a notional change in mind has really occurred in the Indian society today, whether the progressive blindness has blocked to understand caste as a system of relations that develops newer forms of discrimination in the Hindu society, whether the caste mobility has brought dream of annihilation of caste. Is there difference between social mobility and social change? What has happened to Dr. Ambedkar's political project of annihilation of caste? And why I'm raising the question? Because Dr. Ambedkar's movement and Dr. Ambedkar's ideas on caste and education, they have dealt with all these questions. But now it is a time that we should raise this question. We should, talk about these issues. This is the high time. And whether do we feel that that there is still an unfinished, an incomplete project? And what is that? First project, I would say, the annihilation of caste. Annihilation of caste was necessary for Ambedkar for restructuring the world. And his famous slogan, educate, agitate, organize, it was for the emancipatory project. So when we are living in the neoliberal times, when we are living in the post-truth world, these issues are still relevant. These issues are really significant because it is in these contemporary times, in the neoliberal times, there is this structural discrimination. You will find that there is an uneven distribution of the political power. Those who are elected on the reserved seats, are they really the genuine representative of the Dalits? So we observe that there is still an uneven distribution of political power, or the political power has been captured by few elites from the Dalit community as well as from the the elites. And what is the nature of the economy? And I would say that economy, when we are living in the neoliberal times, it is more market-oriented, market-directed economy. So you will find the beautiful malls, you will find beautiful big, airports, you will find the big Samriddhi roads. But who are going there? So these questions should be asked. So we should be also concerned about this neoliberal economy. And why I'm saying that? Because the presence of structural separation and degradation is already happening in these neoliberal times. And when Professor Bagade was talking about the caste consciousness, this caste consciousness is very much related with the freedom, the idea of freedom and discrimination. Whether this caste consciousness is, does it ignores this idea of freedom or discrimination? And when we read news about the atrocities, Dalit atrocities, it is the structural violence which is taking place in today's times. So what I want to say that Dalits don't need sympathy. In fact, when we say sympathy, it is something I would say, as Kant has said, that sympathy is mere feeling of suffering, which does not lead to helpful action. It is a matter of temperament. So what Dalits need is more compassion, and compassion is a fellow feeling combined with desire to help. So Ambedkar talked about fraternity. He did not talk much about, much means he did not give more focus on equality or liberty, but he was more concerned about fraternity because he felt that the fraternity is missing in the Indian society. So he was more vocal, he was more assertive about this principle. The notion of fraternity and Maitri must be the cultural capital for the construction of an egalitarian society, and one should not forget that Dr. Ambedkar also talked about moral equality, and this moral equality had ethical value. And lastly, I would like to just stress on this aspect that the moral culture is very much associated with an idea of humanity which is embodied in preamble of in the Indian Constitution. And so when we are talking about the contemporary political reality, when we are talking about the contemporary social reality, what is more important is that if there is a crisis in the democratic political institutions, if there is a crisis in the society, if there is a presence of, or there is an attempt of imposing an hegemonic ideology, then of social, not only social austeritism, but also just denying the principles of egalitarianism, then there is a grave danger for the Indian democracy as well as contemporary Indian society. And at this time, then it becomes very necessary for all of us to talk about Phule and Ambedkar. You must be wondering that why we have to talk again and again and again about Phule and Ambedkar, and why when many academicians, scholars, intellectuals have been talking about Foucault, Derrida, Kant, and Zizek, then we have to again talk about Phule and Ambedkar, because the way we are witnessing what is happening around, there are challenges and threats to the the egalitarian ideals which are included in the Indian Constitution. Then I think we have to talk more about Ambedkar and Phule and Ambedkar. And I think this has been the mandate and task of this Dr. Ambedkar chair, which has been established at this prestigious university. I again congratulate Professor Muzumdar, Mrs. Muzumdar, and specifically Dr. Ajay Chaudhary, and also his colleague Hemangi Kadlar for organizing this wonderful program. Thank you very much.
I thank Professor Jondale for his insightful views, giving a fact check about the society and giving us some takeaway questions to rethink and introspect our philosophy. So before I formally close on the program, I would request all of you to please visit a poster exhibition that is they were made by our student Miss Saili Nikam and Shruti Botare. So they are based on the theme of the program. So please have a look on. Think more about it. So now I call upon Miss Saili Nikam to present vote of thank for the program.
On behalf of all students and staff, I am glad to be standing here to express my vote of thanks. A special thanks to our guest speaker, Professor Umesh Bagade sir, for accepting our invitation and for being here with us today. Your thoughts have truly inspired us. A respectful thanks to our chair of the program, Professor Surendra Dondale sir. A warm gratitude to Madam Mrs. Sanjivani Muzumdar Madam, Jyoti Chandramani Ma'am, our esteemed sir, Dr. Ajay Chaudhary sir, and Dr. Hemangi Kadlab Ma'am, and Mr. V. Pratap Singh Gautam for their invaluable contribution that have led to the success of this event. A contributory thanks to Mr. Amit Zagde, Mr. Sachin Shinde, Hanumant Warkad, and Praful Kulkarni. A heartfelt thank you goes out to our students, as without their participation, this program would not have achieved such success. Thank you all and take care.